You know, whenever you step into the plan of God for your life, there's always challenges and tests that you experience. You know, I think any one of us, we could sit back and think about a time when our faith was challenged. I often tell our congregation, I say, your faith isn't really tested when things are well, when there's no demand on you. You know, it's easy to say, yes, God, I'll give you everything, or sure, I would do that, or of course I would do that. But the question is, when it's really a requirement, when God really asks for something precious to you, are you willing to sacrifice it because God asked? Not because you want to, or not because it makes sense to, because often what God asks of you doesn't make sense. God's math isn't our math. What adds up to being normal to us isn't normal to God, and it doesn't have to be, because He's God. You know, Abraham, he was already tested once in his life. He was asked to leave a land that was familiar. And then he had to deal with a pretty difficult nephew who wanted the big flashy land. But I want to talk for a moment about Abraham's greatest test. It was the test that unlocked the blessing of the Lord that he had promised chapters before. It was the test that probably if any one of us were given, we would fail. It was the test that he had to release something that was entirely precious to him. I want you to just examine this text with me in Genesis 22, the second chapter. It says, "Then God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on the mountain that I will show you." You know, we read past that scripture and sometimes we lose the severity of that request. We lose the fact that it's critical when you're walking by faith to put all trust in God. Now, the story of Abraham, it's really interesting because Abraham was of old age when he had Isaac. Isaac was promised to him by God. But the interesting thing was God gave him and Sarah a child in their old age. And then God has the nerve, the almighty being who knew the exasperation that Adam and Sarah experienced, or that Abraham and Sarah experienced. And you know what he said to him? He said, now take that gift that I gave you and sacrifice it. Can you imagine what was happening in Abraham's mind, that God, who just blessed him with a son in his old age, is now requiring that son? Abraham, the Bible tells us, Abraham now walks the very next day. He got up bright and early, didn't question God, didn't say, but God, I can't, but God, I don't want to. He said, Lord, if you said it, I trust you enough to do it. They headed towards the Mount Moriah, and Abraham said to his servant, stop, don't go any further. Me and the young lad, we will go forward and we will both return back to you. Isaac was walking with his father. They had the fire, they had the wood, he had the knife, and he said, Dad, are we forgetting something? He said, son, God will provide. They get to the mountain and he raises the knife and he's about to slay his son. I probably would have ran at that moment, having two sons myself. But he was ready to thrust it, and God said to him, wait. And he stopped him at that very moment. The angel said, look over there, and there was a ram in the bush. But I want to talk, just as we close, about the test that Abraham had to fight through, the emotional strain he had to war through in order to be obedient to God. Would you listen to me for just a moment, wherever you are, whoever you are? Following Christ sometimes hurts down to the bone. Sometimes it requires things from us that we couldn't even imagine. But as we see in Abraham's life, God always provides. He always comes through. He always meets the need. But he has one question: are you willing to obey me? Are you willing to do what it takes to step into the blessing that I've promised you? I want you to just reflect for a moment wherever you are. I want you to be willing to give God whatever it takes in the middle of a test or a middle of a trial, to say, Lord, I don't understand it. I don't quite get it, and it hurts my head to think about it, but I trust you. Do you trust God? Do you trust him for your children? Do you trust him for your husband, your wife, your boyfriend, your girlfriend? Do you trust him for your parents, your uncles, your cousins, your brothers? Do you trust God? When he asks you to do the ridiculous, are you willing to do it just because he said so? Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things we don't see. Your faith is tested to the greatest capacity in the middle of some of your greatest storms. But I will tell you that if you're willing to trust God in the middle of your storm, in the middle of your test, in the middle of your circumstance, and give him what is precious, he will show up every time. God bless you. We'll see you next week.